The rain had washed London's stone streets until they shone like polished slate, yet no amount of cleansing could rinse away the stains that polite society left upon a human heart. Behind every lace curtain, beneath every glittering chandelier, and within every drawing-room fragrant with roses and imported tea, reputations were weighed more carefully than virtue itself. A careless whisper could wound more deeply than a blade, while a single cruel jest, if spoken by the fashionable lips of nobility, often became accepted truth before sunset. It was an age that admired elegance, but too often mistook kindness for weakness and mercy for foolishness. On that grey afternoon, as polished carriages rolled toward Blackthorn House, the grand London residence of His Grace, the Duke of Ashcombe, another carriage followed at an embarrassed distance. It was older than the rest, its wheels groaning beneath years of neglect, its paint faded by relentless winters. Even the horses seemed reluctant to approach such magnificent gates. Inside sat Miss Eleanor Ashford, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap, her fingers trembling despite every effort to appear composed. She wore no fashionable silks. Her cream dress had been mended so carefully that only a patient eye could detect the tiny stitches hiding tears along the sleeves. A dark wool coat concealed its age, though not entirely its frayed cuffs. Her bonnet had belonged to her late mother, preserved with such devotion that its faded ribbon seemed less an ornament than a memory refusing to disappear. She possessed neither jewels nor fortune, only the quiet dignity inherited from a father whose greatest wealth had been his honesty. Once, Eleanor had belonged to a household filled with music and books. Her father, a respected scholar with gentle manners, had believed that knowledge elevated the soul above every title. Evenings had been spent beside warm fires, reading poetry aloud while laughter wandered freely through every room. Yet death, indifferent to wisdom, had carried him away before Eleanor reached womanhood. Within months, the cheerful home became a prison governed by another will. Her stepmother, Mrs. Beatrice Ashford, entered widowhood clothed in graceful black silk and flawless manners. Society admired her composure. Few recognized the ambition concealed beneath her polished smile. She transformed Eleanor from beloved daughter into unpaid servant with remarkable efficiency. The young woman's mornings belonged to kitchens, afternoons to sewing rooms, and evenings to endless household duties performed without complaint. Every reminder of her father slowly vanished until only his worn Bible and a volume of Shakespeare remained hidden beneath loose floorboards inside her small attic chamber. Cruelty, when wrapped in refinement, often escaped criticism. Mrs. Ashford never struck Eleanor. She required no raised hand. Her weapons were ridicule, exclusion, and carefully measured humiliation delivered before sympathetic audiences who mistook mockery for wit. Eleanor's two stepsisters had inherited their mother's talent for elegant malice. They laughed softly enough to seem ladylike, yet every smile carried the sharpness of broken glass. That morning, excitement filled the Ashford residence. Invitations had arrived for a distinguished gathering hosted by the Duke of Ashcombe himself, a man whose immense fortune rivaled ancient princes and whose reserved character inspired endless speculation throughout London. Noble daughters dreamed of earning a single dance. Mothers rehearsed introductions before mirrors. Every eligible gentleman secretly wondered which fortunate lady might someday become Duchess. Mrs. Ashford regarded Eleanor with narrowed amusement while fastening an emerald brooch at her throat. "My dear," she said sweetly, "we have discovered a most suitable entertainment." The sisters exchanged eager glances. "You have often claimed," Mrs. Ashford continued, "that every person deserves respect. Let us test whether a duke shares your charming philosophy." Eleanor remained silent. "You shall accompany us." Surprise flickered across her tired face. One sister laughed behind her fan. "The servants may mistake you for one of their own." The other added, "Or perhaps His Grace collects unfortunate creatures." Mrs. Ashford smiled serenely. "Indeed, we shall present you before him. If he possesses such legendary generosity, perhaps he will offer charity where society has wisely declined." The room erupted with restrained laughter. Eleanor understood immediately. She was not being invited. She was being exhibited. Every instinct urged refusal, yet refusal meant returning to a house where punishment would continue long after the carriage departed. Pride could survive mockery. Hunger rarely survived defiance. She lowered her eyes and quietly accepted the order. Now, as the carriage halted before Blackthorn House, towering windows reflected the cloudy sky like polished mirrors. Liveried servants descended marble steps with effortless precision, opening elegant doors for titled guests whose embroidered gowns swept across crimson carpets. Conversation floated through the air with practiced grace, accompanied by distant violin music escaping open windows. Eleanor stepped down last. Several nearby ladies paused. One gentleman raised an amused eyebrow. Whispers drifted like invisible smoke. Surely not. Who invited her? Poor thing. No, another voice replied with unmistakable delight. She is the joke. Mrs. Ashford ascended the staircase without once looking behind her, allowing Eleanor to climb alone beneath dozens of curious eyes. Each step felt heavier than the last. She crossed the magnificent entrance hall where portraits of long-forgotten nobles watched from gilded frames, their painted expressions untouched by pity. Servants accepted cloaks, announced illustrious names and guided honored guests toward the library, where the Duke received visitors before the afternoon gathering commenced. When Eleanor entered that stately room, conversations faltered. Firelight danced across towering shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Gentlemen stood beside crystal decanters while elegantly dressed ladies formed graceful circles around polished tables. Yet no one moved to welcome the plainly dressed young woman lingering uncertainly near the doorway. The silence stretched painfully. Then, from beside the great stone fireplace, the Duke looked directly at her, rose without haste, and before asking even her name, turned calmly toward his butler and said, "Bring this lady a chair." The butler hesitated for the briefest instant, not because he questioned his master's command, but because no such request had ever interrupted one of the Duke of Ashcombe's formal receptions. Every guest in the library noticed that fleeting pause. Then, with impeccable discipline, the servant bowed and hurried to fetch an upholstered chair from beside the tall windows overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. The soft scrape of polished wood against marble echoed through the room with startling clarity, louder than the whispers that had filled the hall only moments before. Eleanor remained where she stood, uncertain whether she had misunderstood. Never in recent memory had anyone interrupted a gathering for her comfort. She had grown accustomed to standing while others rested, serving while others dined, and fading quietly into the background before more important people entered the room. The Duke's invitation unsettled her more deeply than any insult ever had. His Grace noticed the uncertainty crossing her face. "Miss," he said with composed warmth, "I would consider it discourteous if a guest remained standing while I possess more chairs than companions." His voice carried neither pity nor amusement. It was calm, restrained, and entirely sincere. Slowly, Eleanor accepted the offered seat. A murmur swept through the assembled company. Lady Beatrice Ashford stiffened almost imperceptibly. The graceful smile she had perfected over decades faltered for the first time that afternoon. This was not unfolding according to her design. She had expected embarrassed laughter, perhaps an awkward dismissal, followed by endless gossip at Eleanor's expense. Instead, the Duke himself had transformed the intended humiliation into an act of unmistakable courtesy. The room struggled to recover its polished composure. One elderly viscount cleared his throat. A young debutante lowered her fan to study Eleanor with growing curiosity rather than ridicule. Even the violinists in the adjoining salon seemed to soften their melody, as though instinctively sensing the delicate shift taking place beneath the gilded ceiling. The Duke resumed his place beside the fireplace, though he remained standing while Eleanor sat, an unspoken gesture that only deepened the discomfort of those who believed rank should always dictate behavior. "I fear," he began gently, "that I have not yet had the pleasure of learning your name." "Eleanor Ashford, Your Grace." "A pleasure, Miss Ashford." Those three simple words struck her more forcefully than she could explain. Pleasure. Not inconvenience. Not obligation. Pleasure. It had been years since anyone had spoken her name without impatience hidden beneath the syllables. The Duke inclined his head slightly. "You appear to have traveled through unpleasant weather." "The roads were difficult," Eleanor answered quietly, "though they remained kinder than I expected." Something in her reply caught his attention. There was no complaint, no attempt to invite sympathy, only measured honesty. His gray eyes lingered upon the rain clinging to the hem of her coat before returning respectfully to her face. "I trust the journey did not exhaust you." "I have known longer journeys." Again, her answer carried quiet resilience instead of self-pity. Across the room, Lady Beatrice felt the conversation slipping beyond her influence. She stepped forward with practiced elegance. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption. My stepdaughter possesses a remarkable talent for understatement." We feared she might decline such an extraordinary invitation, imagining herself rather unsuitable. Eleanor lowered her gaze. The familiar trap had appeared. She knew what would follow. Lady Beatrice laughed softly. "You must forgive her appearance. She insists upon preserving garments long after fashion has abandoned them, Several guests offered polite chuckles. The Duke did not. Instead, he regarded Lady Beatrice with the same composed expression he had worn since entering the room. "I confess," he replied evenly, "I have always found garments less interesting than the character of the person wearing them." Silence answered him. The laughter died before it fully formed. Lady Beatrice's smile remained frozen, beautiful yet increasingly brittle. One gentleman quietly examined the embroidery on his own expensive waistcoat as though suddenly uncertain of its importance. The Duke turned back toward Eleanor. "You enjoy books, Miss Ashford?" Her eyes lifted in surprise. "What suggested that, Your Grace?" "Your hands." She glanced down instinctively. "My hands? They carry ink stains that soap has not entirely persuaded to depart." Heat colored her cheeks. "I had hoped no one would notice." "I notice many things." The admission was neither boastful nor intimate. It sounded merely factual, spoken by a man accustomed to observing before judging. "My late father encouraged reading," Eleanor said after a pause. "A wise encouragement. He believed books could educate the heart as surely as the mind." The Duke smiled faintly. "Then your father and mine would have found agreeable company." Their conversation continued with surprising ease. They spoke of poetry, history, and quiet country mornings rather than titles or fashionable gossip. Eleanor answered carefully, revealing intelligence that years of household drudgery had never extinguished. Each thoughtful reply seemed to draw greater interest from the Duke, whose reserved demeanor softened almost imperceptibly whenever she spoke. Around them, conversation resumed, though few people truly listened to one another anymore. Nearly every eye drifted back toward the unlikely pair. Speculation spread silently from guest to guest. Why had the Duke ignored London's celebrated beauties? Why devote such patient attention to an impoverished young woman dressed in worn wool and faded linen? Lady Beatrice recognized the danger before anyone else. Ridicule had become curiosity. Curiosity, if allowed to flourish, could become admiration. She excused herself with perfect grace, yet inside her composure something cold and calculating awakened. If kindness had failed to embarrass Eleanor, another strategy would be required. Reputation, once questioned, could collapse far more quickly than dignity. As refreshments circulated, the Duke accepted neither wine nor conversation from those competing for his attention. Instead, he requested tea for Eleanor, ensuring the cup reached her before his own. Another breach of invisible social expectations rippled through the gathering. Several ladies exchanged astonished glances behind jeweled fans, while older gentlemen frowned into thoughtful silence. Eleanor accepted the porcelain cup with trembling hands. "No one has shown me such consideration in many years," she whispered. The Duke answered so quietly that only she could hear. "Then those years have been unnecessarily unkind." For the first time since her father's death, Eleanor felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the careful discipline that had protected her for so long. It was not confidence. It was not happiness. It was the dangerous, fragile possibility that she might still deserve both. Yet across the crowded library, Lady Beatrice watched the exchange with narrowing eyes, already shaping the first poisonous rumor that would leave Blackthorn House before the evening candles had burned halfway down. The afternoon reception drifted onward with all the polished elegance expected of London's highest circles. Yet beneath the crystal chandeliers and the fragrance of fresh lilies, an invisible current had altered its course. Conversations resumed, servants glided silently between clusters of distinguished guests, and silver trays shimmered beneath the candlelight, but every graceful movement concealed a single unanswered question. Why had the Duke of Ashcombe extended uncommon courtesy to a woman whom society had already dismissed? Rumors, like smoke, required only the smallest spark. Lady Beatrice understood that better than anyone present. She moved effortlessly among the ladies gathered beside the music room, offering smiles as flawless as porcelain while allowing carefully measured remarks to escape between compliments. "It is touching," she murmured sympathetically, "that His Grace possesses such compassion. Poor Eleanor has always inspired charity rather than admiration." A countess tilted her head. "Has she endured misfortune?" "More than anyone should," Lady Beatrice replied with theatrical sadness. "Unfortunately, hardship sometimes encourages hopeful misunderstandings." The unfinished sentence accomplished precisely what a direct accusation never could. It invited imagination. Within minutes, speculation traveled from one embroidered fan to another. Perhaps the girl sought a wealthy protector. Perhaps she intended to attract sympathy. Perhaps the Duke had mistaken humility for innocence. No one possessed evidence. Evidence was rarely necessary. Meanwhile, Eleanor remained blissfully unaware of the whispers multiplying around her. Years of quiet endurance had taught her to ignore distant laughter rather than search for its source. She focused instead upon the remarkable conversation unfolding beside the fire, where the Duke continued speaking with patient attentiveness that never once felt performative. "You mentioned your father treasured literature," he said. "Which author remained closest to his heart?" Eleanor considered the question. "Shakespeare, certainly. Yet when life became difficult, he often returned to Milton. The strength to endure paradise lost before hoping for paradise regained." A gentle smile touched her lips. "He used to say that grief teaches us which words deserve remembering. And do you still believe him?" "I believe grief proved him correct." The Duke studied her expression with thoughtful silence. He recognized that such an answer belonged to someone who had suffered long enough for sorrow to become disciplined rather than dramatic. Many people mourned loudly. Very few carried grief with such quiet grace. Nearby, Lord Harrington, an ambitious young nobleman renowned for fashionable wit, approached with deliberate confidence. "Your Grace," he said brightly, "forgive the interruption. London has nearly forgotten you this season." We feared books had finally replaced society. A ripple of laughter followed. The Duke acknowledged him politely. "I find books somewhat less exhausting." More laughter answered, though Harrington's smile tightened. His gaze shifted toward Eleanor. "And who is our unexpected scholar?" Before she could answer, Lady Beatrice stepped gracefully into the circle. "My stepdaughter, Lord Harrington." Recognition flickered across his face. "Indeed? I recall hearing your late father possessed remarkable learning." "He did. What a pity scholarship cannot settle household expenses." Several gentlemen smiled. The jest hovered awkwardly in the air. Eleanor prepared herself for another familiar humiliation. Instead, the Duke spoke. "I have often observed the opposite." Lord Harrington blinked. "The opposite?" "The household's richest in kindness rarely speak first of money." Silence settled over the gathering. The remark carried no anger. Its restraint made it impossible to challenge without appearing uncivil. Lord Harrington offered a stiff nod before retreating toward another group, where forced laughter soon resumed. Eleanor looked down at her teacup. "You did not need to defend me. I disagreed with him. It may create inconvenience. I have never found truth particularly convenient." Those words lingered between them. Not as flirtation. As principle. Outside, the rain finally ceased. Pale afternoon sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, scattering gentle colors across polished marble floors. Dust motes drifted lazily through beams of gold, softening the grandeur of the immense library into something unexpectedly welcoming. The Duke noticed Eleanor watching the changing light. "You enjoy quiet places." "I had forgotten they existed." His expression grew almost imperceptibly sad. "No one should forget such things." She hesitated. "May I ask your Grace a question?" "You may." "Everyone describes you as distant." "They are probably correct." "You do not seem distant." "I simply prefer conversations requiring fewer performances." Her laughter escaped before she could suppress it. Soft. Unpracticed. Entirely genuine. The sound surprised them both. Several nearby guests turned instinctively. Lady Beatrice's heartbeat quickened. That laugh had disappeared years ago. She had considered it conquered. To hear it return inside the Duke's own house felt intolerable. Excusing herself once more, she sought out her daughters in a nearby drawing room. "This ends today," she whispered sharply. The younger sister frowned. He merely offered her a chair. "And now tea." "So?" Lady Beatrice's voice hardened. "Today it is tea. Tomorrow it becomes invitations. Society remembers spectacles. What shall we do?" "We remind everyone precisely who Eleanor is." Her eldest daughter smiled knowingly. "A servant pretending to be a lady." "No," Lady Beatrice corrected coldly. "Someone who must never be mistaken for one." While new schemes gathered beyond the library doors, the Duke escorted Eleanor toward a gallery overlooking the estate gardens. They walked without haste, maintaining respectable distance, accompanied discreetly by servants who ensured propriety remained unquestioned. Beyond the tall windows stretched immaculate lawns glistening beneath retreating clouds. Marble statues stood among flowering hedges, their weathered faces watching generations pass without judgment. "My mother loved gardens," Eleanor said quietly. "You remember them well?" "I remember her believing every neglected flower deserved another season." The Duke rested one hand lightly upon the windowsill. A comforting philosophy. She claimed people were no different. And what do you believe? Eleanor watched droplets fall from climbing roses. I believe some winters last longer than expected. His reply came after thoughtful silence. Even the longest winter eventually answers to spring. She looked toward him. Not because the words themselves were extraordinary, because she sensed he believed them. Entirely. For someone whose world had become governed by endurance rather than expectation, such certainty felt astonishing. A servant approached discreetly. Your Grace. Yes. A messenger has arrived. The servant presented a folded card upon a silver tray. The Duke glanced at the elegant handwriting. His expression did not change. Yet something sharpened quietly behind his composed eyes. It appears, he said calmly, that another guest insists upon joining us. Someone unexpected? Eleanor asked. I suspect, he replied, closing the card with measured care, someone determined to convince me that first impressions are dangerous. He offered no further explanation, but as distant carriage wheels echoed across the courtyard below, Lady Beatrice smiled from an upstairs window, certain the visitor she had secretly summoned possessed exactly the lies required to undo every fragile thread of trust beginning to weave itself between the Duke and the forgotten daughter she had spent years teaching the world to overlook. The messenger was admitted without ceremony, though his arrival carried the unmistakable gravity of unfinished business. He was a neatly dressed solicitor named Mr. Edwin Mercer, a man whose reputation rested upon discretion as much as legal precision. Lady Beatrice welcomed him with a smile so carefully measured that only the Duke noticed how tightly she clasped her gloved hands. Eleanor, unfamiliar with the gentleman, regarded him with quiet curiosity, while the surrounding guests instinctively drifted closer, sensing that the afternoon's unexpected drama had not yet reached its conclusion. Mr. Mercer bowed respectfully. Your Grace, forgive this intrusion. Lady Ashford requested that I deliver certain family documents which, she believed, might prevent an unfortunate misunderstanding. The Duke accepted the leather portfolio without immediately opening it. I was unaware there existed a misunderstanding. Lady Beatrice sighed with graceful reluctance. I had hoped to spare my stepdaughter unnecessary embarrassment. Eleanor turned toward her. Embarrassment? My dear, Lady Beatrice replied gently, some truths are painful, yet they remain truths. A tense silence settled over the library. The Duke broke the seal upon the portfolio and withdrew several neatly folded papers. Mr. Mercer cleared his throat. The documents concerned the late Mr. Jonathan Ashford's estate. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. She had not heard her father's estate discussed in years. Lady Beatrice lowered her eyes with practiced sorrow. My husband departed this world burdened by debts he concealed even from those who loved him. I exhausted my own resources preserving what little remained of the household. Eleanor has long believed herself wronged, though the unfortunate reality is far less romantic. Several guests exchanged sympathetic glances toward Lady Beatrice. Her performance was flawless. She neither accused nor condemned. She merely appeared burdened by duty. The Duke studied the documents carefully. Columns of figures. Legal signatures. Property transfers. Everything appeared impeccably arranged. Yet something disturbed him. Not the contents. The timing. He closed the portfolio. These matters seem remarkably personal. I feared, Lady Beatrice answered softly, that Eleanor's tragic circumstances might inspire conclusions unfair to my family. Eleanor's voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. I have never spoken against you. No, my dear. Your silence has often encouraged others to invent their own stories. The remark stung because it sounded almost reasonable. Eleanor searched her memory desperately. Had she ever complained? Never publicly. Never privately beyond whispered prayers spoken alone in her attic room. The Duke noticed the confusion clouding her expression. He stepped closer. Miss Ashford. She looked toward him. Did you request these documents? No, Your Grace. Did you expect this discussion? I knew nothing of it. His gaze shifted calmly back toward Lady Beatrice. Then perhaps another occasion would better suit family affairs. A gentleman near the fireplace nodded quietly. Several ladies seemed relieved. Yet Lady Beatrice understood that retreat now would surrender the advantage. She clasped a lace handkerchief. I seek only honesty. As do I, replied the Duke. Their eyes met. One smile concealed calculation. The other revealed none at all. Mr. Mercer, sensing the growing tension, cautiously produced another folded sheet. There is also a signed declaration confirming Lady Ashford's complete financial responsibility for Miss Ashford following her father's death. The Duke accepted it. His eyes lingered upon the signature. Jonathan Ashford. Strong. Elegant. Yet something about the penmanship seemed strangely rigid. Not incorrect. Merely unnatural. He had reviewed thousands of legal documents throughout years of managing estates. Instinct often recognized what evidence had yet to prove. He folded the paper once more. You were acquainted with Mr. Ashford personally, Mr. Mercer? The solicitor hesitated. I inherited these matters after another firm's retirement. So you never met him? No, Your Grace. I see. The reply sounded almost casual. Only Eleanor noticed that the Duke's expression had grown unusually thoughtful. The conversation shifted as refreshments were announced in the adjoining dining hall. Guests moved reluctantly toward polished mahogany tables where silver candelabras illuminated crystal glasses and porcelain service. Yet the atmosphere no longer resembled a social gathering. Every polite exchange carried hidden questions. Every smile concealed speculation. The Duke escorted Eleanor through the crowd. I fear this afternoon has become exhausting. I have endured worse. I do not doubt it. She stopped beside a tall window overlooking the gardens. I dislike becoming the cause of unpleasantness. You are not its cause. People seem determined to believe otherwise. He regarded her steadily. There exists an important difference between attracting conflict and deserving it. She absorbed his words quietly. No one had defended her without expecting gratitude in return. His kindness remained strangely free of obligation. Across the room, Lady Beatrice watched them with growing alarm. The documents had failed. Instead of distancing himself, the Duke appeared even more resolved to protect Eleanor's dignity. Her carefully woven narrative was unraveling thread by thread. She approached several influential ladies. It saddens me, she whispered, that Eleanor inherited her father's talent for charming conversations. He too possessed remarkable gifts for persuading generous people. The implication settled immediately. Charm. Manipulation. Dependency. Once again, accusation disguised itself as concern. The poison spread. Soon, subtle glances followed Eleanor wherever she walked. Conversations paused when she approached. Fans concealed whispered judgments. The old machinery of society resumed its merciless work. Eleanor sensed the shift before understanding its cause. She drew a slow breath. I believe I should leave. The Duke looked genuinely surprised. The afternoon has hardly ended. I no longer belong here. His answer came without hesitation. Belonging is not determined by gossip. She smiled sadly. It often feels that way. A footman hurried into the dining hall. Your Grace. What is it? A carriage has just arrived from Ashford Manor. Lady Beatrice stiffened. I gave no instruction for another carriage. The servant swallowed nervously. There is an elderly gentleman requesting immediate audience. His name? Asked the Duke. The footman glanced toward Eleanor before answering. He says he served Miss Ashford's late father for nearly 30 years. Silence crashed over the room. Eleanor's face lost its color. Mr. Whitmore? So he claims Mississippi. Tears instantly gathered in her eyes. She had believed the old steward long retired to the countryside, perhaps even dead. He alone had witnessed the final months of her father's life. He alone knew what had truly happened within Ashford Manor before grief transformed it forever. Lady Beatrice's composure cracked for the first time. Only slightly. Only long enough for the Duke to notice. He turned toward the entrance. Show Mr. Whitmore in immediately. The servant hurried away. No music played now. No conversations survived. Every guest stood motionless beneath glittering chandeliers, waiting as slow footsteps echoed through the marble corridor beyond the library doors. Eleanor pressed trembling fingers against her lips, while Lady Beatrice unconsciously tightened her grip upon the embroidered handkerchief until its delicate fabric tore between her hands. The Duke said nothing, but as the approaching footsteps grew louder, his unwavering gaze never once left the woman whose perfect elegance suddenly appeared far less convincing than it had an hour before. The great doors opened with solemn dignity, and every conversation surrendered to silence as an elderly man crossed the threshold. Time had bent his shoulders but not his bearing. His gray coat showed careful mending, his boots carried the dust of a long journey, and a polished walking stick supported each deliberate step. Though age had stolen much of his strength, it had left his eyes untouched. They remained steady, intelligent, and fiercely loyal. The moment Eleanor saw him, years of loneliness collapsed into a single heartbeat. Mr. Whitmore, she whispered. The old steward removed his hat and bowed deeply. Miss Eleanor. His voice trembled with emotion rather than weakness. "I prayed I might find you before it became too late." Lady Beatrice recovered her composure almost instantly. "How unexpected," she observed pleasantly. "I believed you retired many years ago." "I did, my lady." "Then surely this visit concerns nothing more than sentiment." Whitmore looked directly at her. "No, my lady." The quiet firmness of his answer unsettled the room more effectively than any raised voice. The Duke stepped forward. "You requested an audience. Speak freely." Whitmore bowed again. "I served Jonathan Ashford from the day he inherited Ashford Manor until the evening he breathed his last. I kept his household accounts, witnessed his correspondence, and remained present when he signed his final instructions." Lady Beatrice smiled faintly. "As we all remember." Whitmore slowly reached inside his worn leather satchel. "With respect, my lady, not all of us remember them honestly." A murmur swept across the gathering. He withdrew a sealed envelope, its wax bearing the unmistakable Ashford crest. "I have guarded this for 12 years. Eleanor stared at the familiar seal with widening eyes. "My father's crest." Whitmore nodded. "Your father entrusted it to me after dismissing everyone else from his study. He feared that if misfortune reached him sooner than expected, the truth might disappear with him." Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened around her torn handkerchief. "Surely you do not expect this assembly to believe a forgotten servant carrying ancient papers?" Whitmore met her gaze without hesitation. "I expect only that his grace values evidence more highly than appearances." The Duke accepted the envelope with measured care. The wax was cracked by age but untouched. He broke the seal. Inside rested a handwritten letter accompanied by another folded document. His eyes moved slowly across the page. The room remained utterly still. After several long moments he looked toward Eleanor. "Your father's handwriting?" She stepped closer. Tears blurred her vision before she even read the first line. "It is his." Her voice scarcely rose above a breath. The Duke continued reading silently, then folded the letter with unmistakable deliberation. "It appears," he said calmly, "that Mr. Jonathan Ashford established a trust for his daughter before his death." Shock rippled through the guests. Lady Beatrice laughed softly. "A misunderstanding of legal language, perhaps." The Duke raised the accompanying document. "It further appears that Miss Ashford inherited the family residence, a considerable investment portfolio, and sufficient income to ensure lifelong independence." The smile vanished from Lady Beatrice's face. "Impossible." Whitmore spoke quietly. "The documents transferring those assets after Mr. Ashford's death were never signed by him." Every eye turned toward the solicitor. Mr. Mercer swallowed visibly. I merely relied upon the records provided to my office." The Duke unfolded the earlier declaration beside the newly discovered will. For several silent seconds he compared the signatures. Then he handed both papers to two elderly magistrates attending the reception. "Gentlemen." They examined the documents together. One adjusted his spectacles. The other frowned deeply. Finally the eldest looked up. "These signatures are not the work of the same hand." The words fell like thunder. Lady Beatrice took one careful step backward. "There must be some mistake." Whitmore shook his head. "There has been a mistake for 12 years." Eleanor could scarcely breathe. The room seemed to sway around her. Everything she had believed lost forever suddenly stood before her, not merely as forgotten property, but as proof that her father had never abandoned her. The Duke addressed Lady Beatrice with unwavering composure. "Would you care to explain how Miss Ashford's inheritance disappeared?" She searched desperately for certainty. "It was necessary." "For whose benefit?" "The estate required sacrifices." "Whose sacrifices?" She offered no answer. Silence condemned her more completely than any confession. The Duke turned toward the assembled guests. "Many among us witnessed a lady mocked before entering this house." His voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. "We assumed poverty reflected her worth because someone of respectable appearance encouraged us to do so." No one interrupted. Several ladies lowered their eyes. Lord Harrington stared silently at the floor. The Duke continued. "We judged without knowledge. We accepted gossip instead of character. We honored elegance while overlooking integrity." His gaze found Eleanor. "I was mistaken about one matter." She looked at him uncertainly. "I believed I offered you kindness." A gentle sadness crossed his features. "In truth, I merely returned a fraction of the respect that should never have been taken from you." Tears slipped quietly down Eleanor's cheeks. Not tears of grief. Not entirely. Years of humiliation, loneliness, and unanswered longing dissolved beneath words she had scarcely dared imagine hearing. Lady Beatrice attempted one final defense. "I raised her." Whitmore answered before anyone else could. "No, my lady." His voice held neither anger nor triumph. "You merely prevented her from becoming everything her father already knew she was." The truth settled upon the room with extraordinary stillness. No applause followed. No dramatic outcry. Only the profound silence that accompanies certainty. The Duke walked toward Eleanor until only a respectful distance remained between them. He bowed his head slightly. Not as a ruler acknowledging a subject. As one honorable soul recognizing another. "Miss Ashford." She lifted tear-filled eyes. "The first moment you crossed my threshold, every person in this house looked toward your clothing." He paused. I looked toward the empty space where no chair had been offered. A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips through her tears. "It changed everything." "No," he replied gently. "It revealed everything." Outside, the clouds finally parted, allowing warm evening sunlight to pour through the towering windows. Golden light spread across the marble floor until it reached Eleanor's feet, illuminating the worn hem of the dress that had entered the house as an object of ridicule and now stood before London's highest society as a symbol of quiet endurance. Around her, nobles who had whispered against her offered silent bows of respect, while servants smiled without fear of rebuke. Lady Beatrice remained motionless, abandoned by every convenient illusion she had cultivated for years. The Duke extended his arm, not to rescue Eleanor, but to walk beside her as an equal. She accepted with trembling grace, and together they crossed the library where humiliation had first awaited her. No one laughed this time. They simply stepped into the fading light, leaving behind a room forever changed by the extraordinary power of one ordinary act of human dignity. The grand estates would one day pass into other hands. The glittering gowns would fade, the whispered scandals would be forgotten, and even the names engraved upon marble would slowly disappear beneath the weight of time. Yet generations would continue telling one simple story, not of a duke's immense fortune, nor of a duchess's unexpected rise, but of the quiet afternoon when a gentleman chose compassion over convention. For history rarely remembers those who mocked the humble. It remembers those who restored another person's dignity when no one else would. Eleanor had entered Blackthorn House believing she was the punchline to someone else's cruel joke. She left knowing that no title, no fortune, and no fashionable approval could ever determine the worth of a human soul. The Duke had not fallen in love with beauty alone. He had recognized courage wrapped in silence, grace hidden beneath worn fabric, and kindness that had survived years of undeserved suffering. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. The world will always contain voices eager to measure people by wealth, appearance, or status. But true nobility has never been inherited. It is revealed in the quiet choices we make, whether we choose to humiliate or to honor, to judge or to understand, to pass by someone in silence or simply offer them a chair. Sometimes, the smallest act of respect becomes the beginning of someone's greatest miracle. And perhaps, somewhere in our own lives, there is an Eleanor waiting to be seen, not with pity but with dignity. If this story touched your heart, let it remain with you long after these final words. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness is never wasted, and that even the gentlest act can change the course of a life. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more timeless stories of love, courage, and redemption, and tell us in the comments. What do you think was the Duke's greatest act of love? Offering Eleanor a chair, believing her without proof, or treating her with the dignity everyone else denied her? Until our next journey into the forgotten romances of history, remember this. The strongest hearts are not those that wear crowns, but those that choose compassion when the world expects cruelty.